Thank you very much for coming. And I have to start with a little story from last time that I was here, a few months ago. We had a certain discussion at the end of the class, and there was a young man who asked, but doesn't a different commentary contradict what you just said? And I sort of blinked at the moment, and someone else said, some woman in the audience said, that the Torah has many faces. That's what she said to him. And some people think that the Torah having many faces is, I think this died. So the Torah having, the Torah having many faces sometimes sounds like we don't know what we want. Shouldn't there be one truth and that's it? But there are two things that need to be understood about the Torah and about godliness. There we go. Okay. The two things that need to be understood about the Torah as the document that came from God is that everything that we see in this world is godliness. And so we don't ask about the world, why is there only one face to people? We say it's very natural that every one of us has a different face and a different opinion and a different understanding, and that is godliness. God has many, many faces. The way He appears amongst us, in us, is multifaceted. That's one thing. The other thing is that each one of us is infinite. That was the topic last time I was here. That you're not just a world, you're a universe. What that means is that if something is godly, because God is infinite, so if something reflects godliness, it is also infinite. And so you find that first and foremost in human beings. That every person here, if we would start to talk, we could go on talking forever. And really, if we wanted to start exploring ourselves, we'd see that there's no end to what we are. It's just a question of finding the right intermediary that can help us open that up. The same thing is true about the Torah. The Torah is also multifaceted, and it's infinite in its depth. So that the fact that there are many commentaries and they contradict is not something that makes it less. It's actually what reveals that it's divine. Because if I could only understand one way if there was only one way I could understand the verses, so that would be a human construct. If there was a verse that I couldn't go infinitely deep into, meaning that the more I learned about it, the deeper it goes, and it goes on forever. So that would mean that it's something man-made. But like each one of us is a creation of God, so the Torah also is multifaceted and it's infinite in its depth. So what do we do with the multifacets? What do we do when there's so many facets to it? So we have to understand that the commentaries, each one of the commentaries is a great sage who looks at the Torah and he finds a reflection of himself in it. And that's what he brings out. So that's why it's very important for us to remember who was the sage who said so and so, because in the end, this is a picture of the whole community of sages who discovered this. But it doesn't end, because every person sitting in this room can be a sage. And every person in this room can also delve into the Torah in a very relevant way and find their own reflection in it. and their own, what we call their own part in the Torah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to encourage everyone to write their novelties in Torah, their novel understanding, and to even publish them. Of course, to say something that a lot of people will quote, so you have to have a lot of background. That doesn't mean you have to get that. You're not looking for recognition. You're looking, first of all, for discovering the infinite depth of the connection that each one of us has with the Torah. And that comes from reading something and trying to see, what do I understand? What do I see? So the best way to start is, first of all, to learn everything that was said before. So we can't learn maybe everything, but we learn a lot of things, a lot of different opinions on something. And the topic that we took today, again, because of that question, was I specifically took a topic that we have what we call a partzuf. Partzuf literally means a persona, but in Kabbalah it means that we take many, many different opinions and we structure them into a model. And then if you want, you can think about this model as if you can hold all of these interpretations in your head at once. We're going to see 10 interpretations of a particular verse that everybody knows. So if you can hold all of these interpretations all at once in your mind, it's like a hologram that's like a key that churns something in the mind. But you have to have all of them together. It's not so easy. So first of all, we'll look at them one by one. And then at the end, that's why we have this handout here, and they're structured. So if you in the end can look at this and all at once you see all the interpretations together, it changes something in the mind. It's almost like a key that churns something that until now might have been dormant and not completely awake in each one of us. So the topic is, what are the foundations of a happy marriage? It's something that almost everybody has something to say about and wants to hear something about. So it's a topic that should be engaging for all of us. So the verse that we're going to look at is in Hebrew. I'll say it first in Hebrew, but I think most people are familiar with it, whether it's in Hebrew or in English. Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado, e'aseh lo ezer kenegdo. It's not good for a man to be alone. I will make him a helpmate facing him. Kenegdo means facing him, literally. What's the background? The background is that when God created man, he didn't create the male and the female separately. He created them together as in one body. And how did it work in that one body? That they were back to back. That's the explanation that the sages give for this verse. And not just for this verse, but for a previous one that also says, Zacharu nekava Abraham, that he created them male and female. But he created them in one body, and then he separated them. And the reason that he separated them, he says in this verse, is because it's not good for him to be alone. But still, the question presents itself, if it's not, God knows everything. So what, he didn't know that it wouldn't be good for him to be alone? So why even go through the exercise of first making them back to back and then cutting them apart and bringing them face to face? What's the rationale behind doing that? In other words, there's something more natural about being back to back. What does back to back symbolize? We'll see when we get to the fourth interpretation. We'll talk about it some more. But there's a state of being back to back with people also in our relationships. We can have a back to back relationship with someone. We can even have a back to back relationship with ourselves. In certain areas of our lives, we have a back to back relationship. To have a face to face relationship, or as people say, eye to eye, is a completely different level of relationship. So let's start with the first one. So basically what we're doing now is we're collecting from the different classic commentaries and some Hasidic commentaries. We're collecting 10 different interpretations and explanations of why God first created them back to back, and then he cut them apart and brought them face to face. So the first interpretation is from Nachmanides, the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. And he is very, very important. He's so important that a lot of his commentary is his disputes with Rashi. Rashi is considered to be the basic commentary of all of Torah. And the Ramban, he's big enough that he takes Rashi and he says, I don't agree with him. There's another one like this, the Ibn Ezra, that we'll see later. And he also, these are the three classic commentaries on Torah. So, like a basic knowledge of Torah means that you learn the verses, and you learn the commentaries of Rashi, the Ramban, and the Ibn Ezra. They're all called Pashtanim. Pashtanim means that they're plain meaning. The difference between them is that the Ibn Ezra, Avraham Ibn Ezra, he doesn't see himself committed to what the sages said. It's a very interesting thing. He has his own way. He says the sages had their own way of interpreting the Torah. My way of interpreting the Torah, he says, is that I want to understand the plain meaning of the words without the sages. They have their own way of understanding things. The Ramban, Rashi is the classic commentary because he reflects everything that the sages said, at least the foundational. So when you learn Rashi, you learn everything basically that's in the Talmud and the Midrashim about a specific verse. The Ramban is special because he also explains the plain meaning, but he does it more according to the Kabbalistic tradition. He was a great Mekubal. And so he added into his commentary a lot of these, call them deeper thoughts about what's hiding behind the text. So here, when he says, I will make him a helpmate facing him, the Ramban says we have to look at the reason. It says it was not good for him to be alone. How can you understand the word good, he says? The word good doesn't necessarily have to be a moral description, good or bad. Good can also be utilitarian. Meaning, in other words, is this the best possible way for man to be, or is there a better way? And so he says that when a man and a woman are together back to back, they have no choice. It's almost like you fall into the relationship and it's natural, it feels natural, and you don't have to choose. But when you're face to face, you have to choose to be together. In other words, what happened to them was like this, that at first they knew they were together because they were created in one body. So they had the backdrop, the background, that we belong together. But when you know that you belong together, you don't choose to be together. So even if it's the most natural connection in the world, you have to add choice into it. You have to add willpower into it. That I want this relationship, even if it's the most natural relationship in the world. One of my teachers was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Fruman, who passed away a few years ago. And it was famous that his relationship with his wife was, on the one hand, the most natural relationship in the world. Everybody knew this. They loved each other tremendously, and it was very, very apparent because they taught a lot about relationships. But it was also very clear that every day was a struggle. It's almost you can't understand how can that even work together. On the one hand, they could never be with anyone else. It was very clear to them, to everyone who was around them. On the other hand, every single day they had to struggle to be together. Why? Because they were both very committed to their choices, not just to their nature. Meaning they were people who wanted to live intentionally. They wanted to have intention behind their relationship. That they want this. Not just because it is, not just because it feels good, not just because it's natural, not even just because they understand that they're two parts of the same soul and they feel it, but they also want the commitment to come from their choice. And so they struggle all the time. The struggle was such that his wife once told me that every day when I wake up, I don't know if we'll stay together today. I don't know. Now, everybody knew that there's no way that they wouldn't, right? But in their minds, there's a tremendous struggle to bring choice into it. Now, a lot of people don't have to struggle so hard. Why do you mean they don't have to struggle? But they have to choose every day. They don't have to work on it. They don't have to force themselves to become intentional. But that's not something negative. It's something very positive. Let's take another example. When we go to pray, so many people know the words by heart. And then when they pray, it's just a routine. You just say it. Or, even if you don't know the words by heart, or maybe even because you don't know them by heart, and you don't even understand them, so the feeling is that I'm just sort of flowing through it, sort of sliding through it. Many times when a person comes to pray, there's nothing happening. He doesn't feel that he's standing in front of God. He feels detached. He feels dissonant. Is that good or bad? So if you think that the role of prayer is something that should reflect a natural flow in yourself, then prayer is not making anything new. It's not innovating anything in you. It's not renewing anything in you. If everything is flowing naturally, so, okay, I already knew that. There's nothing new here. But if it's difficult, the difficulty itself is what leads to something new. Now, that's an example that will lead us now into the crux of what the Nachmanides says, what the Ramban says. He says that the reason it's good to have to choose to be with my spouse is because it's good for the children, he says. He says it makes the children better. He says children that see that their parents choose to be together are at a completely different level, emotionally, intellectually, and certainly in terms of the type of relationship they want to build, than a child who thinks that it's just some kind of natural event that happened once, and that's how it is. This is the fact that the children see that the parents choose, and even if they don't see it, even if they're not aware of it consciously, it acts subconsciously. But this is an incredible thing, because what he's saying is that choice improves the progeny. That when I choose, then my children, my offspring, are more developed than if I don't. How would we say this today? That this is like an evolutionary trick. Like, how do I make the next generation better than this generation? Right? In Nachmanides' time, there was nobody talked about physical evolution, but he certainly talked about spiritual evolution, and we still talk about spiritual evolution, which is the progenitor to understanding physical evolution. That the reason that we have any kind of inkling that things are, again, this is what separates a person who has a relationship with God and a person who doesn't, that the person who doesn't have a relationship with God doesn't know that everything is improving all the time. Because that's what godliness means. Godliness means good. But what kind of good? So it's like the good here. That God being good means that the world is constantly improving, and despite what the media says. It's not true what they say. They don't see what's going on in people. There are more challenges, but we're facing these challenges and getting better all the time. Why? because we choose to face them. He says choice is what builds reality. It's what makes reality better than it was before. So if you just follow nature, nature has a law called entropy. Everything is falling apart. So if we were just in a back-to-back relationship, says Nachmanides, then this they knew even in his time. They called it the law of entropy. They didn't call it in those words, but it was called kol hoveh nifsad. Everything that exists eventually falls apart. That's the rule of nature. So they knew this. And so he says, if there's anything that can overcome this natural law of nature, if there's anything that can overcome the natural rule of nature, which is that everything is entropic and falls apart, it's human choice. And the moment that there's human choice, you make the progeny better. Now there's an amazing thing in what we call scientific evolution, or what they call scientific evolution, is that they have no explanation for why there is sexual reproduction. There's no good explanation. There's all kinds of theories. Why? Because sexual reproduction is actually not productive. Why is it not productive? Because you have two people making one. Two specimens of a species making one. The better strategy is what we call asexual reproduction, like an amoeba, or like salamanders that can do this also. That one makes one. That's much better than two make one, because you're cutting your numbers down by half each time. So why do this? So there's all kinds of theories, but none of them have really been proven. But that's what Nachmanides is telling us, that this is the direction to look in. That it's not so easy to prove this, but it makes the progeny better. It increases the value, maybe in terms of their genetic pool. There are all kinds of directions you can take this in. But the point is that the progeny become better and better from generation to generation. So that's how Nachmanides explains why he had to put them together first as one, but back to back, and then separate them in order to bring them face to face, so that there would be choice, and that nature is not enough. The back to back is like the natural state. Is there a way to mute them? You can mute them. They don't have to. Mordechai, can you turn the speaker on? It keeps turning off. Okay. We have 10 interpretations to go over, so we have to make them a little bit quicker than the first one. So the next one is a Sforno, who was also one of the early commentaries from Italy. And he says something else. He says in the beginning, he created them together because they share the same, or in the beginning, they were given one, what we call image of God in them. That the man and the woman together have an image of God. And so then he separated them from one another in order that they both have the same image. Meaning at first they had to be created together, so they would receive the same image of God, and then they're separated, and by being separated, what do they suddenly see? That they're equal, that they have the same image of God in them. Meaning, it's almost a way of, we'll talk about this more in a moment, but it's like recognizing who my mate is. I have to. It's like I see the same image of God that I have in myself. I see in my wife, and the wife sees it in the man. Where do you see it? So a lot of times people say we see it in the eyes, but it's like a feeling that godliness is the same in this person as it is in me. This is a very interesting experiment you can try and see if it makes you see the world differently. Every person that you see, think that God is looking at you from within their eyes. Then you see how multifaceted God is. Because when you look at everyone's eyes, each pair of eyes, each person, you right away see it's a different personality. But then think that this is God now looking at me. And that's God also, and that's God also, and that's God also. All these are God. But from these many, many options, I have to find the one that when she looks at me, it's like I'm looking at her. That's what I feel. That we have the same image of God. Though there's all kinds of ways in which to tell this. This is just one example. Another teacher of mine, Rosh Steinsaltz of blessed memory, he used to say that the two most important ingredients in finding someone that you can marry is that, first of all, you have to have the same goals in life. If you don't have the same goals, that's like, doesn't start really. But the other part was a different aspect. This is like classic Rabbi Steinsaltz. You have to have the same sense of humor. If you don't laugh from the same jokes, then you don't have the same image of God. Because the image of God also comes out in humor and how you understand things. And jokes, humor, is a very deep sense that we have in ourselves. It's not the regular way of thinking. It's always like, sort of like a little twist on reality. So if you don't have that twist, you really don't have that same image. So that's what the Sforno says. He had to put them together in the beginning. He made them as one in the beginning because they have the same image of God. And now this image of God was divided into two. There's maybe this is my image of God dividing into another. Now, until now, I didn't explain why the order is this way. So now, in the second one, now it's time to go back a little. In Kabbalah, we have something called the 10 Sfirot. And 10 Sfirot means that it's like a model with which you can analyze anything in the world. In the same way that we use the decimal number system to basically analyze anything in the world mathematically, or in terms of quantity. But when we look at things in terms of Kabbalah, we're looking more at the quality of something. So the first Sfirah is called the crown. The crown, like its name, it means that it's above the head. You don't put the crown, you don't wear it, you place it on the head. So what does that mean? That means that the crown is the super consciousness. That's what it's called. It's not what Freud called the subconscious. It's a super consciousness. The true subconscious or the true unconscious is not what all the bad things that I'm harboring inside. That belongs to the animal soul. It's also unconscious. But it's not where I really take my inspiration from. It's not what really needs to drive me. What really drives a person is their super consciousness. It's the part of the soul that can't fully integrate into the body. And so it continues to affect us from above, as it were. Above is not literally above. It just means, sometimes we even say from around us. But it just means that we can't be 100% aware of it. And the awareness of it comes from time to time. Suddenly we feel that something higher is driving us. Something like this could be, for instance, that people have talents. All the talents that people have all come from the superconsciousness. So if somebody has a musical talent, or somebody has a talent for mathematics, for language, for drawing, any type of art. All these types of talents, they all come from the superconsciousness. And the person feels driven, right? A person who really has a talent, they feel driven to express it, to hone it, to make it into something that's very strong. One of the powers of the superconsciousness is what I just said, being driven is to have will, is to want something. It's not to want something because somebody told me that it's good to want this. Right? It's not that. It's to want something because my superconsciousness wants it. I don't even know exactly why I want it. There's many people that, I was talking to a friend before, there's many people who, when their children grew up, it wasn't so important for them to teach them the Torah and to make sure that they had a Jewish education or a very good Jewish education. But then suddenly when they grow up and they decide that they want to marry someone who's not Jewish, suddenly something awakens in them. And they begin to say, what did I do? Why didn't I... But it wasn't conscious before. It suddenly comes down. It's a drive, a willpower that doesn't come from what you understood, because what you understood before was that it's not such a big issue. That's the lower will. That's not really will. It's more like being practical. It's like trying to get through life. The higher will is something that a person doesn't have you can't learn about it. It's something that just appears out of nowhere. So that's one of the powers of the crown. And what we talked about before was that you have to find that will in order to have a good foundation and a good basis for marriage. This will that comes from above, that's exactly why it wasn't enough just to tell people, okay, so you need to want who you're married to. It had to be more than that. It had to be that the connection to begin with was super conscious. It's like somewhere I remember that we're together, but I don't know exactly where that's from. And I want to make that the reality again. Okay, I hope that's clear what I just said. But it's like I have a recollection, it's super conscious. I don't know where it's coming from, but I know that we're supposed to be together. And that will comes from that recognition. But again, it's not fully conscious. I don't really know where it's coming from. So where is it coming from? It's coming from the fact that originally they were created together. And there's like a memory of that somewhere. And that memory is what fuels this will that appears to be together. So now the second explanation that we gave from the Sforno about the fact that they have the same image of God, that's an explanation of wisdom. Why is it an explanation of wisdom? Because it's what makes them equal. What really makes people equal is that they have an image of God. This is, by the way, interestingly enough, this was the foundation of democracy also. All of democracy was based on the notion that every person has an image of God. And so therefore, every person has to have a say in how his life is governed. That was something that Jefferson said, that he took the notion, he didn't invent it, obviously, it was already talked about for a couple of, almost 100 years already, before it was actually put into practice in America. But it was the first place that put it really into practice. And the rationale behind it, Jefferson said, was that we believe that every person has a soul. Every person has an image of God. And so they're equal. You can't say that one person gets 10 votes and one person gets 1. So the same thing is also in a marriage. You have to feel that you're equal. And the equality comes from having been originally together and then taken apart. So we both represent the same facet of godliness. By the way, God, like we said, every facet of God is infinitely deep. So we might not agree all the time, because at times my wife goes in one direction in this facet that we share, and then at times I go in the other direction. But there's still depths of the same facet. And that's what got us together in the first place. So that's wisdom. Why do we say that this is wisdom? Wisdom allows us to nullify. If I understand that my wife and myself were both representing the same facet of God, we can nullify to one another. But if we feel that I'm one thing and you're something else entirely, and we don't represent the same thing, so it's very hard to decide, so how do we work this out? But the reason I can accept, like my wife says, do one thing, and I think I should do something else. So why do I follow what she says? Because in the end I feel that we're coming from the exact same place. So it could be that I don't understand it completely now, she understands it better. But most of the time she also feels the same thing. And so we have these arguments about who should nullify to whose opinion. It's like the opposite of an argument. So why? Because we both feel that what you're saying is also godly. And it's from the same facet of godliness that I understand. Okay, we'll leave it at that. There's more depth to it, but we'll leave it at that. The third explanation, this is very clear, hopefully, that why were they separated? So that they would be facing one another. When you face someone else, you see a reflection in them. The point of seeing face or being face to face is to see myself in the other person. What for? To do tshuva. The main reason that a person gets married, according to the Apter Rebbe, the Ohev Yisrael of Apt, and he was a Hasidic Rebbe, a Talmud of the Maggid of Mezrich, and he writes that the main reason to get married is to do tshuva. A person who's married has to do tshuva all the time, has to return to God all the time. Why? It's easy. Because when you're alone, you can't see yourself. It doesn't matter how self-reflective you are. When you're alone, you can't see your faults. Well, if I'm with someone else, they may tell me my faults. Okay. But for that, I don't necessarily have to get married. Maybe I could just be with a really good friend and he'd tell me all my faults. There's something that we haven't discussed yet, but the verse said, I will make him a helpmate facing him. Se lo ezer kenegdo. These three words, lo ezer kenegdo, they capture three levels of relationship between a man and a woman. There's a level of relationship where she's facing him, or it even means fighting him, kenegdo, against him even. A lot of people translate it that way as if it's the pshat, as if it's a simple meaning, the plain meaning. The plain meaning is facing him. But it also can mean, not a little bit less plain, is that she's against him. So there are people whose relationship is one against the other. That's how it works. There's people whose relationship is ezil, is to be a helper. They help one another. But there's a higher level than these two, which is called lo. Lo means for him. But lo also means that they're like one person entirely. It's almost like there's only one person here. It's a very high level of a relationship where they know exactly, each one knows what the other is thinking completely. They don't even have to discuss sometimes. So how is it different when I have my wife in front of me than if I have a friend who tells me off? with my wife, I can see how I behave even if she doesn't tell me anything. She doesn't have to say a word. I right away see. It's like a mirror. The way I behave affects her even when she doesn't know that I behave that way. That's the scariest part. It's like a mirror that is always in front of you, even if the mirror doesn't see you. So you wake up in the morning and everything's wrong. And you ask why. You don't have to ask why, you know why. Because last night wasn't so good for me. I did all kinds of wrong things. And somehow it reflects in her. And she doesn't even know that I did something wrong. She doesn't even know what I did. She has no idea about it. She feels agitated without even... All the more so when I am really, literally, and directly the cause of the agitation. So with a friend, I can brush it off and say, okay, whatever, he'll get over it. But if I care about her, then I can't say that. I right away see that there's even the smallest wrong thing that I do, it right away appears. Men hate this. But why is it really that way? Because a person should be doing tshuva his whole life. It's not to create strife. It's to create an opportunity for tshuva. Now this is the thing that's missing. That if right away she sees that I do tshuva, she does tshuva also. So one thing, that the woman in this case will follow her husband. If she sees right away that what he does is every time that he sees that he did something wrong, so he right away stands up and he says, I'm sorry. And he says to Hashem, he says to her, I'm sorry. So right away she also does tshuva. Why does she have to do tshuva? Because like we said, you have to do tshuva all the time. It doesn't have to be a particular reason. Tshuva is a state that I'm always driving myself to come closer to God. There's always things about me that are wrong. If I start listing them, as deep as I am and infinite as I am, I have blemishes all the way down. And at every level. They all need to be fixed in some way. They can't always be fixed, but they have to be recognized. So says the Abturav, that the reason that they came together face to face now, that now we brought them face to face so that they would see each other, there would be a mirror for one another. He would see how he needs to do tshuva, and that would inspire her to also do tshuva. And so they would be in a state of tshuva, both of them, their whole lives. Imagine the two people are always saying, I need to improve. That the easiest thing for them to say is, I'm not perfect. That's the basis of coming together in marriage, that I can say, there's somebody who knows all my faults, who knows everything. Because she reflects it. I'm not ashamed of my faults there. Why? Because I know that the purpose is not I don't need to hide them. I need to work on them. So the fact that she reflects it is not a negative thing. And she feels all the time that the fact that my husband is so involved in tshuva all the time, so I'm also involved in tshuva all the time. And she finds her things to do. And there's always things to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's behavior. It could be that there's other problems also. So this we put in Binah. This is the Sfira of understanding. Because always in the Zohar, Binah is called tshuva. It's always called returning to God. The next one is from the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And he says, that it's about identity. This is very related to what's above it, to the will. We'll see in a moment. What does it mean that it's about identity? That if you're back to back, and we said you're naturally together, there's a natural reason to be together, so you don't have to identify who you want to be with. To be severed and then have to find one another means that I have to go through a process of identifying who I'm connected to. That is what sets man apart from animals. Animals don't identify who they're connected to. They can be with anyone. Right? In the animal world, the mother cheetah, after a few years, can have offspring with her son. And then the next season she has with someone else, and someone else. And it's uncommon in the animal world for there to be fidelity in the sense of the two specimens are related to one another for their whole lives. But finding the one other person that I'm with is not just a question of fidelity, it's a question of identity. When I identify someone else, I also identify myself. It's a definition of who I am. When I have to look into a crowd and say, what am I connected to? Or even if I go to Baskin Robbins, is there such a thing as a kosher Baskin Robbins?
Yeah.
Where?
I
might go.
I'm La Cienega.
So they have, 31 flavors, and I'm supposed to figure out which flavor I like the most. So is any of the ice cream there terrible? Probably not. There's at least 15 flavors that I love. So why do I love this one? I have to choose one. So why do I love this one and not all the others? Because this one, when I find it, is actually a definition for myself. It actually helps me define who I am. Again, in the sense of revealing my superconsciousness, revealing what's above, but now in a way that's completely conscious. It's not will. I don't have to want it. It's something much beyond that. I'm drawn to it, not because I choose to, because I'm just drawn to it. And it helps me define who I am. When you have choice, you can have identity. When you don't have choice, you don't have identity. Let's say it in a different way. The reason that there's so many individuals in America is because there's freedom. When there's no freedom in a society, there cannot be individualism. Individualism is a product of freedom. If you have no freedom to choose, you can't become an individual because you can't begin to find out who you are. So this choice that we talked about before, now it becomes identity. Identity is the sphira of da'at. Da'at is consciousness in the sense of who am I? So this is the explanation given by the Or HaChaim. He says that the choice that they had to come together now, that they have to find one another, it's like the searching process itself is a process of identifying who you are. And if you didn't have that process, you wouldn't be able not just to find your mate, you wouldn't be able to find yourself. One depends on the other. People that don't want to find someone else are skirting finding themselves. They're running away from finding themselves also. Because when you find your partner, that's how you find yourself. Again, a very deep part of yourself. It could be that you know yourself at some level, but the deeper parts can only be revealed through this process. There's two parts to how you recognize someone as the one that fits you. again, this is something, we're saying this is the foundation of marriage. So this is something that is ongoing. It's not something that you did once. You have to keep finding. You have to keep finding your wife and finding yourself. You have to keep finding your husband and finding yourself. But there are two parts to it. It says that the Sefirah of Dat is divided into two. There's a left side and a right side to it. The left side is rejection. The right side is recognition. What's the difference? That I can know something by knowing that all the other options are wrong. Right? That's one way of identifying something, because all the other options don't work, so this is the only one that works. Or I can come from a state of recognition, which is right away, this is what I connect to. But really, they both have to be there. They can't work separately, they have to work together. There's a very interesting thing, I'm going to say it in Hebrew, which is very, I hope I don't lose the understanding, because it's hard to say it in English, because the words in English are not the same. When the Rambam writes the laws of marital relationships, he calls it Hilchot Ishut. Ishut is a word that comes, meaning marital, it's relationships, but it's a word that comes from the word Ish. Ish is one person. In modern Hebrew, when they want to talk about the relationship between a man and a woman, they don't call it Ishut anymore. They call it miniyut. Miniyut is a word that comes from the word min. Min means species. Okay? What's the difference? If I call the relationship a species, then I'm saying I could have relationships with anyone in my species. It's a general species thing. It's like in the animal world, that you can have with anyone. It doesn't matter, it just has to be the same species. When I say it's ishut, I'm saying it can only be one person. It's saying that at some point, if the relationship is founded properly, then you can't even imagine how in the world you could be with another person. It can only be with that one person. It's like it becomes like this is what the meaning of the relation of having a marital relation, physical relationship is. It's one-dimensional. It's only these two people. It can't be anyone else. It's a ishut. It's one person. Again, it's the difference between a specimen and a species. Once the identity is so strong, it becomes so powerful, I can't see myself in any way being with anyone else. There's a joke that they like to say in Hebrew, but it's already pushing it. But that if you go to this, how do you know that all the other women are not for you? So one rabbi used to say, you go to the supermarket and you see counter number 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you say that in Hebrew? You say kupa. Kupa is like the counter where you get your, where you pay. But the way it's written in Hebrew, you can also read it kofa. Kofa means a monkey. So there's monkey number 1, monkey number 2. No, you can't connect to anyone. Everything else looks to me like, what? How could you ever even think about it? It doesn't work. It's like a different species. I can't connect with it. That's how strong the identity can be. And that's what the Or HaChaim is saying. It's very fitting for the Or HaChaim. We call him Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the holy, because of how stringent he was about his physical relationship in general, specifically with his wife. Okay. So we've been at it for a while. Everybody's getting tired. So these are the intellectual sides, the 4 intellectuals. So they'll do the next 6 much more quickly. So loving kindness, the chesed, is a Radak. Radak says something amazing. He says that they had to be separated and then come together because otherwise there's no society. says society, the grain of society is a relationship between a husband and wife. We usually ask, like, what is society made up of? So we say individuals. But the Radak, Rabbi David Chimchi, is also one of the Rishonim, one of the early commentaries. He says that without this connection between a husband and wife, there's no society. So the one thing that comes right to mind is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent out many, many emissaries to all parts of the world to set up societies, Jewish societies in different places. One of the unspoken rules, but everybody knew this, is that you can't go out to become a shaliach, you can't become an emissary unless you're married. That you can't start a society if there's not a couple. There has to be a couple in order to do this. So that's the grain of all society. Of course, that's how humanity was created, but he's saying something much more than that. It's also society. It also means that you're not alone. It just means that you have a good friend, that you're never alone, you're never really alone. The next one is Rashi himself. So Rashi, it's a classic that I think everybody knows, that he says, Zacha is lo zacha kenegdo. He says, if he merits, sometimes it says zachu. Meaning, if they merit, then they have the divine presence between them. And so she becomes, or they become helpers for one another. And if they don't merit, then fire consumes them, then they fight each other all the time. So what was it for? So on the face of it, people think that it's just a bad thing. But it's not a bad thing at all. To have this dichotomy, these two possibilities, that either things will go well or they won't go well depending on how I act. That's a positive part of life. What do we call that? We call that din. We call that judgment. No one wants judgment anymore. But if you don't have judgment, then you have no way of refining yourself. In the end, we want still to live in a world where there is some kind of judgment. Maybe we don't want other people to judge us. That's something else. But we want there to be consequences for our actions. We don't want to live in a world where there's no consequences for anything. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that nobody else would be punished or something like that. I'm talking about ourselves. That if you live without marriage, the foundation of the marriage is that there is accountability. So basically what Rashi is saying is that they had to come together to create accountability, because otherwise you would have stayed completely unaccountable. If they would be back to back, they wouldn't be accountable. They would naturally be together. There was no way to separate them. They couldn't really fight or anything like that. And so there would be no accountability in the human being. And so taking them apart and putting them back together is to give us accountability. That's might. I think it's... The next one is almost the same idea, but this is from Reb Nachman of Breslov. And he writes that the reason that he brought them back together is to give them compassion. That if you are not with someone else, you also don't learn about compassion, not just about accountability. But to be with someone else that you're responsible for is how you foster a compassion in yourself. It's a very basic. It's a very basic trait that we all have. But like many of the basic traits, if it doesn't have a field on which to grow, and it doesn't have something that brings out this potential, then it stays dormant inside. And this in general is a very important topic that we can talk about for a long time. The intellect can develop by itself. You don't need someone else. The really smart people in the world, and even people who are not so smart, they're usually bothered by there being someone else that they have to explain everything that they think to. They want to think quietly by themselves. But the emotions, the heart, cannot develop without there being someone else. None of the emotional attributes of the human being can develop if I don't have someone else that's facing me and is connected to me and that I have to work with. It's called the difference between light that shines onto myself and light that shines onto others. When I think, it's just a revelation to myself. I don't need anyone else in order to think, and to think well even. I can be my own critic, I can do everything by myself. But when it comes to the attributes of the heart, and the central attribute of the heart is compassion, then the only way that it can appear, the only way I can express it, is if there is someone else that I have to have a relationship with. And so that's called light that shines unto others. It's an aspect of who we are, but it simply doesn't come out until we have someone else before us. The Ibn Ezra that we said that he likes the simplest explanations, so he gives really the simplest explanation in the world. Why wasn't it good that they were together, that he had to separate them? So he says very simply, because two are better than one. It's just that way. Anything you want to do in the world, it's better to do it two people together than to do it just one. Anything practical that needs to be done. So what's this like? It's like the feet. You could hop on one foot, but you understand right away that having two is much, much better than having one. So that's why this is in Netzach and Hod, or in victory and acknowledgement, that the 2 feet are like one. You can't walk with 1 foot. You can only hop. But to walk, to do something much more productive than just hopping, so you have to have 2. So what does this mean? It means the foundation of marriage is that you have to have something that you do together. There has to be, it has to be a practical thing that they do together. The most practical thing, obviously, is children. That's the most practical part of any relationship. But beyond that, at some point, children grow up, they don't need you anymore. So you have to have projects that you do together, that you decide that you're doing them together. And you do them for the idea that doing together is better than doing alone. Again, if you start out and say, I want to build something in my shop in the garage, and I'm going to bring my wife over to help me, very quickly that's not going to work. Why? Because you have your own ideas about how it's supposed to be. It has to be something you decide that you're going to do together because you're doing it together. It can be as simple as doing a puzzle of 3,000 pieces. It just takes a long time. It can be something like that, but it just has to be that you're partners in something all the time. The Rebbe of Genuth, who has a book called Avodas Yisrael, all of his book is about marital relationships. It's very interesting. He takes the marital relationships between a husband and wife, and he applies it to the connection between the Jewish people and God. It's very similar to Shir HaShirim in that sense. So he also talks about this verse. And he says that even though the moment that you marry, it increases your sexual drive, it's the only way to fix the sexual drive. It says, even though before you were married, so you didn't have any opportunity, and we know that the sexual drive, the less you use it, the less you give it an expression, the more dormant it becomes. The more you use it, the more active it becomes. That's how it works. So he says the moment that you get married, so now it's active all the time. So on the face of it, you become much more full of cravings, of sexual cravings. He says, but it's true, but it's the only way to fix it. The only way you can rectify it is through the relationship itself. So now we'll say something that we didn't say before, because again, this is the middle axis. The middle axis are all connected to one another. In the crown, we said that before they were together, before they were taken apart, they were together back to back. Back to back also means that you have no conscious awareness of what's holding you together. When you come face to face, so the sexual relationship is also part of what holds you together. But now it's conscious. Now it's become conscious. And you can only fix something if you're conscious of it. To say just it's dormant and therefore I don't have an issue, that's not how Judaism sees the world. You can't just say, okay, I'm not going to bring this into play. I don't want to have... Abraham also didn't want any struggles. But what can you do to follow God? So right away, when he was a young kid, he had to break all his father's idols. Of course, it would have been better if he never had to come in contact with an idol and he would have grown up on some island where there were no idols and everything. But then there wouldn't be any Judaism. There wouldn't be any Torah. There wouldn't be any of this. We wouldn't be sitting here. None of us. It's because this came to the forefront and he had to struggle with it and he had to fix it, that eventually fixing it led to something much greater. So if it's not conscious, and here we're saying that the moment that you get married, it all becomes conscious. So now you have to deal with it. Now you have to fix it. And now you have to find a path to make it better. That's the Rebbe of Genuth, and that's foundation, because foundation is always related to the procreative member of the body. Yeah. Sorry?
There's also self-conscious
Right.
within marriages. How do you deal with those?
They have to...
Nothing is conscious within a marriage.
Right, but that's what brings it out. So we prefer that it becomes conscious. We don't want it to remain subconscious.
You prefer, but not always goes according to what you prefer.
So you have to work on it. That's what we're saying. These are foundations of making a marriage good. That even these things that are like, they seem to be worse off because we're married. But the fact that they came to light, again, like we said before about accountability. If I live by myself and I'm not accountable to anyone, I can seem like a very, very nice person to myself and to others. But the moment that I'm faced with a struggle called marriage, a lot of my qualities that I'm not so, I don't like so much, they come out. So what's better? Would it have been better for me to just sit alone in my house and be alone and be a very nice person? Or to have these struggles, even though they're difficult? So we said it's very interesting that this is all called, these struggles are called in Kabbalah Heichal HaZchut. They're called the chamber of Zchut. Literally means something positive, but it's in the sense of purification or refinement. That the time that a person is in this world, he should use to refine himself. There's not much time here. And so if during the time that I'm here, I shun all the difficulties that I have inside of me and say, okay, I got away by ignoring all my problems, so it's almost like I wasn't here. And a person suffers anyway for 70, 80 years here. So he might as well turn it into some process that actually does something, that actually at least brings it to light. Even to bring it to light is better than for it to be hidden. Because it could be that I won't fix it. One of the things they have to believe is that sometimes when something comes out in someone else, they're not the one who fixes it. Sometimes the fact that something even came out can be then fixed by someone else entirely. They don't even know about it. Okay, that's a different topic right now. But it could be that I can't finish the work. But I can't, as the sages say, I can't be free of engaging in it. To not engage in it altogether is to miss the point of life. And so we have to strive that when there are issues, or even when we don't know there are issues, to become aware of them. Most of the time, one side is aware and the other side is not aware. Most of the time. It's not such a big secret to one of to either the man or the woman. Most of the time, one of them does know about the other. But they don't want to say anything. Okay, in any case, that's what he says about rectifying the covenant. And finally, we have the chizkuni. And he says something very simple also. He's also a Rishon. He says that after Adam was separated into two, so what did he try to do? He tried to find, again, he went through this attempt to identify himself and identify his mate. So he went to all the different creatures in the world, and he tried to find, is this where I see my other image of God, the other half of my image of God? And of course he was disappointed. So he saw millions, he went on, I guess it's sort of like what happens when you cross Carl Sagan with speed dating. So he went on billions and billions of dates. And none of them worked out. So what did he feel in the end when he was brought to Eve, when they brought together again? So he came to the conclusion that this is so much better than what I thought it would be. Why? Because I have this, again, this is a very special way of thinking. We'll explain it in a moment. Because I've had so much heartbreak before, that I've tried so many times and it didn't work. When you're taken apart, and then there has to be a feeling that if you didn't, I don't know, maybe some people here were married right away and they never went out with others. But the fact that I remember that nothing else worked, it gives me a whole new perspective on my marriage. It's like something I remember all the time. Why is this in kingdom? Because that's how kingdoms work. That's how politics works. How do you know that you have the right leader? You have to have a lot of terrible leaders first. You can't really recognize, you can't really appreciate. When it comes to kingdom is very, very practical. So the only way to know that something is good is that it works. And the only way you know that it works is because all the others didn't. We tried all the others. Right? That's what Churchill said about democracy, right? What did he say? He said, democracy is new, and it's the worst, in theory, it's the worst way to run a country. Right? From the point of view of the leaders, it's the worst way. But we tried all the others and they failed. So even if this one sounds like it's, on the paper, it sounds like the worst, and maybe it is on paper the worst, but this is what we have right now. By the way, this is also something that the Rabbi talked many times about in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. The way the land of Israel is run is nothing like what it should be. And yet he very much respected the fact that it was a democracy. Why? Because he said that right now, this is the only way that works. If you try doing this in America right now, try to bring all the Jews in America into some system of governance. Has anybody ever tried anything like that? I don't think they even try. There's no point. The Jews in America have it easy because somebody else does the roads, and somebody else decides on the taxes, and somebody else fights the wars, and it's very easy because you don't have to make all these decisions. But you're never happy, even if you don't have to make the decision, you're not happy with them. So now imagine that you're also the people who have to make the decisions. So right now, until there is a figure that can show something entirely different, this is as good as it gets. This is what we have. It's terrible. I hate it. I can't stand it. Like I told people, I don't listen to the news in Israel. I don't care anymore. Why? Because I have to live my life. I have to do something, and I'll go crazy if I listen to everything. A lot of people feel like that in America too right now. Yeah, but that's something else. But in the end, it works. We don't kill each other. And by the way, people think that Jews don't kill each other. It's not true. Read the Bible. Read the Tanakh. See how many Jews were killed by Jews. When there was kingship, when there was a kingdom. Jews are just as good as anyone else at politics. We're no different. But right now, this works. At least, we usually don't kill each other. And that's a big step forward. Eventually, there will be something that will be much, much better than all this. It will be something that every person will feel is not just we don't have anything better, it will be something that we really feel a part of. But for now, it works. So he says, Mashiach. Shot. But,
Now.
but the kingdom, that's how kingdoms work. That it's like there's a lot of heartbreak before, and then I understand that this does work. This is better. So on the one hand, it's very low. On the other hand, it's very practical. And it is one of the foundations of building a healthy relationship. That it has to be clear to me that everything else didn't work. Nothing else worked. This is what works. So what we did now is we saw 10 different explanations of why God had to take them apart and put them back together, and how each one of them builds a foundation for marriage. And so now the challenge for everyone who's here is to think about, can I hold all 10 explanations at once in my mind? It's not impossible. It's actually how you have to think. You have to think in 10 dimensions. You have to get used to thinking in 10 dimensions. Every single topic that you take, there has to be 10 different explanations, 10 different interpretations. And only when you see the full picture does the mind really turn on. And not just the mind, but the relationship turns on. But the thing that you're building becomes much more alive. Because when you bring these 10 interpretations in together, what they create is like an image of godliness within the mind. Even when a person just learns one interpretation, he's also touching upon godliness, because each one of these interpretations is godly. But when you have all of them together, then you're also touching upon the multifaceted aspect of godliness. And that is actually a higher dimension than just understanding one aspect. So I began by saying that there was a question that was asked here about 4 months ago by a young man. He said, but one contradicts with the other. It's true. Some of them are not the same. Some of them might even be contradictory. Here, not so much. They seem to be that they live together nicely. But a lot of times, when you read different commentaries, you see that they contradict. But it's the same thing as that there are people who have different opinions. And until and really the goal of Torah is to bring us to be able to see the many, many facets of God in the Torah, and then to see the depth of all of them together at once. That's what creates the true unity, the true experience of one God. Because one God doesn't mean that he's just one and not two. It means that he's before 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6. He's everything together before it even splits. And in the end, that's the foundation. That's the real foundation of marriage. Okay. So let me just say that, reiterate that there's the beginning of what we call the Nefesh Academy, which is taking the basic teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidus and explaining them psychologically in such a way that every person that hears these things, that these basics, has a better understanding of how to live a healthy life. And a lot of the topics that we touched on here in this Nefesh Academy, we have whole classes on, whole courses on. So on Sunday, across the street in the Residence Inn, is when we'll launch it basically. And hopefully every month, one of our teachers will come here to Los Angeles to launch another course. And very much encourage everyone to look into it and to hear some of these ideas and see how it can really help. I can say that my life is divided before I heard this and after I heard this, before I started learning. And I also have to say that every time that I teach this from the beginning, it's like the first time. The reason is because as much as I teach this, as much as it's like part of me, it deepens every time. It's like, because it's the soul, because it's like the psychology, it's not knowledge. It's like you're giving birth to yourself every time again, because there's no simple solution to being a human being. I wanted to say before, there's many things you can't fix, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to fix them. You have to become aware of them. The awareness changes things. For instance, a person who gets angry a lot, you can't cut out anger. There's no easy way to cut it. There's no simple way. If there's anger, there's anger. But awareness of the fact that I'm prone to becoming angry and understanding why cuts down on that behavior. It's a very interesting thing, that awareness by itself is really the solution to most of the problems. And they diminish slowly until, after many years, they also disappear. But when you try to approach them directly, it usually doesn't work. So I hope to see everyone on Sunday. If we have a full house like this, we'll move across the street. Yeah, sure.
You're talking about wisdom and understanding. I think I cannot understand. So why we associate wisdom or chokhmah to male and bina to female?
You're asking in general or specifically here?
In general about...
Let's look here and we'll see it. That we said that the equal image of God is in Adam, it's a masculine aspect, meaning it's like that the male sees in his wife that she has the same image of God as he does. So he's the actor. But when we're talking here about mirroring in Bina, in understanding, who's the actor? The actor is the woman. She's much more active there. Even though she might not want to be active, but she's the one who's reflecting the man's behavior. And so right away I see that they're masculine and feminine, but you could say this is how we organized it. The reason we organize it this way is because the Chokhmah and Binah are usually described as the insemination or the seed and the building up of the seed. Meaning that Chokhmah is like an insight, an inspired insight that you suddenly get. So a lot of times it's described like drops of wisdom coming down. It's like you have a faucet that's broken and it comes down drop by drop. The Bina, understanding this, is described in the Zohar especially as something that's built up, meaning it takes that one drop and it builds it into a whole construct. So that's like the womb, that's like the feminine aspect. It's nurturing. It's taking one thing and it's nurturing it until it grows. So this is a whole world of imagery that comes from the Midrashim and especially from the Zohar, but it's a whole world of imagery that the more you understand it, the more you get into it, you see that every place that you mention Chokhmah, you're talking about a point. I'll say another thing about the word itself. Chokhmah is understood as koach ma, the power of nothingness. What does it mean? It's like that you can condense something into so small until it becomes like it's nothing. So again, there it's connected to the male seed. But on the other hand, Binah comes from the word binyan, to build up. And who was built up? So it says that after he severed them, after God severed Adam and Eve, well, they weren't Adam and Eve yet, but he severed the male and female, he built up the female. It says, Vayiven et tzela. He built up the side. Tzela, people translate it as rib, but it doesn't mean rib in the Torah. It means a side. So he built up the side. It doesn't say about the masculine side that he built it up. He only built up the side that he took from him. So there's this feeling of construction. I say it a little bit deeper also. Men cannot build a home. The masculine doesn't know how to build a home. It knows how to inspire the home, but it doesn't know how to build it. What does it mean to build the home? First of all, when I got married, my father told me, before you go into your new apartment, You have to buy a garbage can for the restroom. What? Why? You throw everything into the toilet. What are you talking about? I couldn't even understand that every nook and cranny in the room, in the house, has value. Like for me, it's just walls. That's all it is. What's important? Oh, I do my work here, I learn here, I study here. But call it the building up of the home, I couldn't even begin to understand. So it's like you can say it's a stereotype, but it works almost always. I mean, there's always exceptions. There's always people who are not like this. But you look at how women dress and how men dress, right? So the only way men could figure out how to look normal and decent is that they always wear the same thing. That's the only way it works. But women can get away with not only can they get away with not wearing the same thing, but they can't wear it. They can't even wear the same thing twice. Why? Because the understanding that have to be put together is like built in. There's something in there. But if you leave this to a man, he'll just get confused. He always just doesn't know what to do with it.
So when they came face to face, they were aware of their differences
Right.
and their different abilities.
Well, only then can they really fertilize one
And they were
another.
aware of it at the beginning.
Right. When they were face to face, when they were back to back, they weren't chokhmah and binah yet. They didn't have that. They were like in the crown still.
I got it.
But in the crown, in the sense of still unaware of one another. But
Yeah, I got it. When they first.
I hope I got it. So. No, I'm still learning, so I don't know. Yeah.
Did you say that the parents should stay in the marriage because of the children?
No,
They shouldn't.
but they should. I didn't say that, but I think they should to a degree. To a degree.
To a degree.
Yeah, and it's very hard to judge when that degree has been crossed.
You're saying that it's better to separate because for the sake of children. It could be
There are situations in which it's better. There's no easy way to say, there's no one size fits all here. And you have to be with someone who's very, very deep in his understanding of seeing what will happen. The two people involved usually can't weigh it properly. There has to be somebody looking at it from the outside, but they have to be insightful enough to see what will be better in the end. Because there are some situations, in general it's better to stay together, but there are some situations in which the benefit is not worth it. And the problems that will come out are worse. But you have to really find someone who is very insightful. We'll be talking about that. It's called understanding in souls. It's an ability that few people have. It's knowing when to say enough is enough. It's a very hard thing to do. So the general rule is stay together, but sometimes it doesn't work.
So it's not like a big sin that if you
No.
with your partner-
It's a big problem.
It's just to be together every day, right?
So that's if you can.
But it's very possible that down the road, marriage it gets better.
Yes.
Like the beginning is a lot of
Yes.
fight,
By
a lot
the
of
way,
argument. It's possible that it gets to the point where
not only is it possible, but when I first got married, after 3 months, I was certain that I was going to get divorced. I went to my parents and I said, I don't want to go back. So my father said to me, I also felt the same way, don't worry about it. He was right.
so you have to give it a chance.
Yeah, 30, 40 years is a good time. Yeah, it's a chance. It's not like, you don't have to, not forever. It's a chance. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, sure. It's like making like an entrance at the end. Well, it's the. Yeah.
Can you give us a shot and a sort of why is a mitzvah only for men or women? And that's a question that runs very often. And by the way you put things, you're putting men and women at the same level at first. Then of course, they have the different characteristics. The male part, the female, dissemination of the seed and the ground, whatever it is. So why is it just a male mitzvah? There are a lot of men that, as you said, they don't want to face themselves, so they don't get married. Besides being maybe selfish, or other reasons that I don't want to get into. But there are also men that really would like to find somebody to marry and they are not able. And yet you have this huge mitzvah, which is right off the beginning of the relationship. They just can't do the mitzvah, which applies only to men. So why this mitzvah applies? Both. I would like to hear,
So first.
People are leaving, so I just wanted to.
Okay, so Tamil will.
Just 1 second. So everyone, we are now taking online registration for the event on Sunday.
מה נשמע?
So it's
מה זה איתו אותך?
information is over there on the roll-up.